There's a reason we still say Mercia and Wessex when we talk about certain places in England. These names are echoes of a time before England was a single kingdom, a time when the land was divided not by natural barriers, but by power, language, and ambition. And in the middle of it all was someone like Eldith, a Saxon woman born near the River Severn, in the shadow of tribal boundaries she never chose, but which shaped her entire life. But who were these early kingdoms? And how did a loose patchwork of settlements become what we now call England? To understand that, we need to go back, not just to the fall of Rome, but to what rose in its place. In the early 400s, Rome left Britain, not with a bang, but with a quiet disappearance. Their soldiers departed, their taxes stopped, their roads cracked and overgrew. But what filled the vacuum wasn't nothing. It was tribal warlords and local elites, small communities defending what little they had. Christianity lingered in pockets, but the old beliefs returned too: gods of the earth, sky, and blade. Elgith's grandmother still told stories of the great stone roads and the men in red, but no one really remembered how those roads were built or why they ended. Instead, there were new arrivals: Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Some came as migrants, others as raiders. All came to stay. But why did they come, and why did they succeed? There's long been a myth that the Anglo Saxons simply swept across Britain like a tide, driving the native Britons west. But the truth is murkier. Yes, there was war and displacement, but there was also integration, alliance and marriages, and the reuse of Roman towns and forts. Language changed, Latin faded, Old English took root. Elgith's great-grandfather, we imagine, might have spoken both tongues, one for trade and one for faith. By her lifetime, only Old English remained. And this new culture wasn't monolithic. It splintered into 7 main kingdoms, what we now call the Heptarchy. So what were these kingdoms, and how did they come to dominate the map? The Heptarchy was never official. It was a historian's term, not a king's, but it's useful. Northumbria in the north, stretching from the Humber to the Forth. Mercia, land of the border people, covering the Midlands. East Anglia, home of the Angles. Essex, Sussex and Wessex, the East, South and West Saxons. Kent, the earliest of the Christian kingdoms. Each kingdom had its own laws, coinage and dialects and power struggles. Borders changed constantly. Kings married off daughters like pawns. Warriors pledged loyalty to whoever could feed them. Elgith was born in Mercia, but her mother came from Kent. And when she married a man from Wessex, she moved yet again. To her, the island wasn't a country. It was a shifting puzzle of names and loyalties. But one thread pulled them together: religion. And that's where the island's shape began to change. When Augustine of Canterbury arrived in 597 AD, he didn't just bring a message of peace. He brought a blueprint for unity: bishops, dioceses, scribes, and kings who ruled by divine right. Kings were baptized, monasteries were founded, literacy returned, at least in the church. For the first time since Rome, information travelled across kingdoms. Elgith's village had no church, but she remembered when the bishop came through, robed in white, followed by singers and scribes. It was a spectacle. It was authority. Through Christianity, the kingdoms began to see themselves not just as rivals, but as participants in a shared moral and legal framework. But unity had a dark side, for as some kings grew pious, others grew powerful. Could one kingdom rise above the rest? By the 700s, Mercia was dominant. Its king, Offa, even built a great dike to divide the Britons from his territory. He struck coins with his name. He negotiated with Charlemagne. But Offa died, and Mercia declined. Then came Egbert of Wessex, a king who began to call himself Bretwalda, ruler of Britain. Wessex absorbed Sussex and Kent, and it pushed into Mercia. It dreamed of a united land. Elgith's grandchildren were born during these wars. They heard rumours of kings who wanted to rule from coast to coast. For the first time, there was talk of something like Engaland, the land of the Angles. But just as the patchwork began to consolidate, a new threat arrived from the sea. Who were these raiders, and what did they want? From the 8th century, Viking ships began to land on British shores. First they raided monasteries, then they settled towns, then they took whole kingdoms. In 865, the Great Heathen Army landed. By 874, Northumbria, East Anglia and much of Mercia had fallen. Only Wessex remained. Elgith's family was forced to flee, first west, then south. She lived to see a new term whispered on tongues, Danelaw, a land ruled by Norse law, not Saxon. The Heptarchy as it had existed was shattered. But in its ruins, a new England would be forged, one born not just from conquest, but from resistance and reinvention. What was the Danelaw and how did it reshape the island again? The story of the Heptarchy is the story of a land not yet sure of itself, where kingdoms rose and fell, and the idea of England was still forming. It was a time of migration, myth and military ambition. But with the arrival of the Vikings, everything changed again. New languages, new borders, and new kinds of kings emerged. In the ashes of the old kingdoms, the Danelaw rose. Thank you for walking a little further down the road that made Britain with me. The story winds on. Try this one. I think you'll like it. Until then, thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you very soon.